Stuart Holman here with you again as we continue in the book of Genesis, where today we're going to take a step further in the narrative of Abraham, remembering that our aim in these daily devotionals is to get to know God better in the sense that we walk faithfully with him on our journey, in our day. Now, previously we've noted that Abraham's life is circumscribed by God's commitment to him, sealed as a covenant. Under the terms of this covenant, God promises Abraham and his offspring land, that is a place, God's place, people, so many people that they will become a nation, and thirdly, blessing which will take many forms, but principally in terms of a relationship with God. And so through the narrative of Genesis chapters 12 through 24, Abraham takes time to grow into the man of faith that God has called him to be, culminating in the proving of his faith in Genesis chapter 22, which we looked at yesterday. So trusting God's promises of blessing through Isaac, Abraham demonstrated that God is the one who always provides. What follows in Genesis 23 then is a picture of Abraham continuing to trust that God will give the land of Canaan to the generations that will be born through his son Isaac. But rather than passively trust, Abraham takes the initiative in establishing himself and his family in the land that God has promised him. And so, picking up the narrative in Genesis chapter 23, Sarah, Abraham's wife, lived to be 127 years old. She died at Kiriath Arba, that is, Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham went to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her. Now, throughout Genesis, geography and place names are important, very important. Hebron will become a central and important place in the life of the nation of Israel, especially prior to the establishment of Jerusalem as David's capital. And yet, if we read Genesis carefully, we notice that this area has already been significant for Abraham, even before Sarah's death. But now, Abraham seems to seize the opportunity provided by Sarah's death to try to buy a stake in the land of promise. Verse 3, Then Abraham rose from beside his dead wife and spoke to the Hittites. He said, I am a foreigner and a stranger among you. Give me some property for a burial site here so I can bury my dead. And so then begins some lengthy negotiation between Abraham and the Hittites. The NIV has Abraham initially asking to be sold some land, but actually the Hebrew suggests he might have begun by asking to be given some land in that place. Now, throughout the language between the parties in this negotiation, it's always courteous between Abraham and the Hittites, but the negotiations are tough. Verse 5, the Hittites replied to Abraham, Sir, listen to us. You are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will refuse you his tomb for burying your dead. Abraham, by now an exceedingly wealthy man, is held in high regard, even though he's not one of the Hittites in this negotiation. And so straight away the Hittites offer to give Abraham any cave he chooses as a burial site. But that's not exactly what Abraham's after. So in verse 7, Then Abraham rose and bowed down before the people of the land, the Hittites. He said to them, If you are willing to let me bury my dead, then listen to me and intercede with Ephron, son of Zohar, on my behalf. So he will sell me the cave of Machpelah, which belongs to him and is at the end of his field. Ask him to sell it to me for the full price as a burial site among you. So notice Abraham wants to buy a cave with the land. He wants to own it outright, not to be gifted it. And he has a particular piece of land in mind, which he apparently knows already. And so the narrative of these negotiations continue very respectfully between Abraham and the Hittites until finally Abraham gets his chosen plot of land to buy and then to bury Sarah in it. He pays what seems to be an inflated price, but Abraham has what he wanted, and he ensures that the transaction is recorded legally and according to the custom of the land. And the conclusion to this account brings great emphasis to some key ideas. Verse 17. So Ephron's field in Machpelah near Mamre, both the field and the cave in it, and all the trees within the borders of the field, was deeded to Abraham as his property in the presence of all the Hittites who had come to the gate of the city. Afterward, Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre, which is at Hebron in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave in it were deeded to Abraham. See, the way that this narrative concludes tells us that geography matters. This place matters. Abraham bought himself a portion of the promised land before he would die. Now, although he's an incredibly wealthy man, he has been a nomad. He is now, though, a landholder. But why would Abraham choose this particular piece of land at Mamre? Well, this land was very significant to Abraham because it was the land God promised him. It was the land he'd been living in by faith, waiting for God to make it a home for his family for generations to come. You might remember back in Genesis 13, Abraham and Lot, his nephew, parted ways. Lot chose the land near Sodom and Gomorrah, and so Abraham said, okay, I'll turn towards Hebron. So back in Genesis 13 we read, the Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted from him, look around from where you are, to the north and the south, to the east and the west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you. So Abram went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he pitched his tents. There he built an altar to the Lord. And so from Genesis 14 on, this land had been Abraham's preferred place to live. In Genesis 18, it was also the place where the angel of God appeared to Abraham to confirm that Isaac, a son through his wife Sarah, the chosen, would be born a year later. In the narrative of chapter 18, the great trees of Mamre are again referenced as the place where God spoke with Abraham. So this particular piece of land has anchored the promises of God. Throughout the negotiations for the burial plot for Sarah, Abraham had set his hopes only on this one plot. Regardless of the price, Moses now legally owned just a small piece of the promised land, but it was a very important piece of it. There he marked the sacred site of God's appearances to him, so that generations to come would have a tangible sign of God's covenant promises. And so Hebron remained sacred to Israel, perhaps the most sacred of sites, I guess, until David made Jerusalem the home of the Ark of the Covenant, and later, of course, the temple. But what we're seeing here so many centuries before is that toward the end of his life, Abraham's faith was completely aligned with the promises and the purposes of God. He wasn't trying to bring them about or complete them off his own bat, but he was demonstrably all in on this covenant relationship with God and all of the promises that God had made to him. And it's this synthesis of personal action and faith that I think we should seek to copy today, more than Abraham did We know the purposes and plan of God as they've been revealed to us in Jesus Christ. We know how the story ends. Faith, in our situation, means that we start acting on the basis of God's plan being fulfilled. We act on the basis that God will do exactly what he says he will, in big ways and in small ways, just as Abraham did. Now, for example, we know that only some things in this world will last. Only some things actually have enduring value. Not houses, but people. Not academic accomplishment, but transformed character. Not boasting in our achievements, but faithfully telling of God's kindness in the gospel. That will last. And so for your prayerful consideration today, since we know the kingdom of God has been inaugurated by Jesus Christ and will soon arrive in all its fullness, what is one tangible expression that you can give to the kingdom of God this week?